Namaste and welcome. Presentation on Indian Partnership Act 1932. We will be studying Indian Partnership Act in 6 components, starting with the nature and the definition of different concepts, rights of partners, duties of partners, formation of a partnership firm, its reconstitution and various possibilities, and dissolution. And here we will be covering the entire life cycle of a partnership. We will start with the first aspect of nature of partnership firm. Let us start with the nature of partnership with the definition of various concepts. Partnership is the relation between persons who have agreed to share profits of a business carried on by all or any of them acting for all. 1. There is a relationship between natural persons who have agreed, means there is an agreement. The agreement talks of two things: sharing the profits and carrying on a business. Carrying on a business and then sharing profits therefrom. And the business is carried on either by all the partners or any of them acting for all. These are the essential requirements, and these are not exclusive conditions. They are all inclusive. They are not mutually exclusive. You have to fulfill every one of these conditions. Therefore, if someone is getting only a share of profits, he doesn't become a member because he has to fulfill other conditions also. Who is a partner? Partner is a person who have entered into partnership with one another. Here we are talking of a partnership agreement. Who have entered into partnership agreement with one another, they are individually called partners, and as a group, collectively, they are called a firm. And the firm might carry a name. The name under which their business is carried on is called firm name. R and Company is a firm name. And the relationship of partnership is from the contract. Contract is nothing but an agreement enforceable at law. And it is not created by status. It is created by an agreement which is enforceable at law, which is nothing but a contract. And while deciding whether a person is a partner in a firm or not, we have to look into the real relation between them, which has to fulfill these conditions under section 4. And this is the time to understand what are the types of partnerships. We have two broad groups. One, based on the duration of the partnership, we call it as a partnership for a fixed term or partnership at will. And based on the purpose, if it is for a specific purpose, we call it as a particular partnership. If it is for a general purpose, we call it as general partnership. Let us understand each of their meaning. When a provision is made in the contract between the partners for the duration, if the contract says this partnership is for a duration of say 6 months or 9 months or 2 years, when it provides for a duration, or it says at the end of 9 months this partnership will be closed, it says for determination of the partnership. If either the duration is indicated or it makes a provision for when the partnership will close, determination means closure. If any of these two is done, it is called a fixed partnership, partnership for a fixed term. If a partnership doesn't provide for any of these two, it has no time frame. At the will of the partners, it can be determined or its duration is decided by the will. Means when duration and determination are at the discretion of the partners, it comes to partnership at will, where no provision is made by contract between the partners for the duration or for the determination. That becomes a partnership will. And even when it is for a fixed term, if that fixed term crosses and still the partnership continues, and if they don't invoke these two clauses, then the provision says when partners continue business even after their duration, here duration was fixed, but if they continue even after duration, the partnership will be a partnership at will. Means all partnerships which are fixed in term, if they continue beyond their period, they also become partnership at will, which fulfills these two conditions. Then comes particular partnership. A partnership where a person becomes a partner for a particular adventure or undertaking. The business is fixed. It is for a project. At the end of the or completion of the venture or activity, the partnership is dissolved. It is a special purpose vehicle. It is meant for, it starts with the starting of a project, ends with the end of a project. It is for a particular project. Hence it is called particular partnership. Then general. When the purpose of the formation of the partnership is to carry out the business in general. There is no specific project, a general project, and its scope is open. It is not defined. Then it can go on and on and on, and that is called general partnership. Thus, there are 4 types of partnership organizations, depending on the duration, and 2 more depending on the purpose, specific adventure. We can just see how many types of partners are there. There are 4 types of partners: working partner or active partner, sleeping partner or dormant partner, limited partner, partner in profits, and nominal and quasi partners. What do they do? A working partner contributes capital, sleeping partner contributes capital, limited partner contributes capital, partner in profits also contributes capital. But a nominal partner does not contribute capital. He just lends his name. He is only for name purpose. What about participation in management? An active partner participates in management. A sleeping partner doesn't participate in management. A limited partner doesn't participate, nor do partners in profits, nor nominal or quasi partner. Only active partner participate in management. What about share of profits and losses? Do they share both profits and losses? Yes, working partner. Sleeping partner shares profits or losses. Limited partner, yes, shares profits or losses. But partner in profits, he shares only profits. He will not have any share in the losses. And a nominal partner will have neither profits nor losses. He just lends his name for accommodation. Then unlimited liability. Working partners have unlimited liability, so do sleeping partners, but a limited partner has got a limited liability. And partners in profit has unlimited liability, so also nominal partner, his name is widespread in the market and people deal with the firm based on his name, unlimited liability. Only person who doesn't have unlimited liability is limited partner. Are they known to outsiders? A working partner is quite visible. He is known to outsiders. A sleeping partner is always behind the curtain. He is not seen by the people and they don't know about him. So also limited partner. He is not visible for the external clients or external world. Partner in profits, no visibility. Nominal partner is visible to outsiders. Therefore, only working partner and nominal partner are visible to outsiders. This is the 5 types of partners, and of them more important from the outside point of view are 2 people. One, the working partner, and the nominal partner. The other three partners, since they have got constraints on their role and the liability, they are behind the screen. We have partnership, limited liability partnership, and company. We can see their differences as a legal entity. LLP and company are legal entities. Liability, unlimited in case of partnership and LLP. Limited liability in case of company. Number of members, 2 members in partnership, maximum 100. In LLP, minimum 2, there is no upper limit. In case of company, private limited company minimum 2, public limited company minimum 7, maximum 200 for private, there is no upper limit for public. Governing laws, Partnership Act, Limited Liability Partnership Act 2008 and Companies Act 2013. Transfer of shares, need consent of other partners. In case of LLP, agreement should be there between subscribers. In a public limited company, shares are freely transferable, whereas in private limited company, it is subject to restrictions. Management by all partners, by any or all members, it is by the board of directors. Relationship between members, it is an relationship of agency. Partners are agents of each other and that of the firm. There is no agency relationship in LLP because it is a limited liability company. There is also no agency relationship in regular company. Profit distribution as per agreement, whereas in companies it will be as per dividend declared by the board and the AGM. Remedy to creditors, there is joint and several liability of partners. In case of limited liability partnership, it is a legal entity, therefore only against the company. In company also only against the company, not against members. Audit, simple audit compliances, turnover and capital linked mandatory audit for LLP, and strict mandatory audit compliances with various reports and verifications, including tax audit in case of company. Resolution, as per agreement, death or retirement of partner, as per provisions of LLP Act, and under Companies Act, there is a winding up procedure. These are the comparative features of the three organizations. We can see one by one. That brings us to learn more about the rights of partners. We will be covering the right in terms of profit sharing, indemnity, and also interest wherever it is payable. Let us take one by one. A partner is not entitled to receive remuneration for taking part in business. He is an active partner, he takes part in business, but there is no special remuneration to him because he has got a share in profits. The partners are entitled to share equally in the profits and shall contribute equally. but they can have a separate agreement which may talk differently, because mutual rights are subject to contract between the partners. Where there is a interest on capital, if it is allowed, interest shall be payable, but it can be paid only when there are profits. If the firm is making losses, interest cannot be paid. And if a partner, for purposes of business, brings some capital advance and he has agreed to subscribe, he can be paid an interest, and there is a ceiling on that, ceiling of 6%. That is interest on additional capital brought in or advance brought in, which is not required to be brought in by everybody. If a partner incurs some liabilities and makes some payment on behalf of the firm shall indemnify him because it is firm's liability, provided it is incurred in the proper conduct of business in the ordinary course, and the person doing that act, he has acted as a man of ordinary prudence, as if it is his own business. The way he has conducted himself, he would have conducted the same way if it was his own business and it was his own expense. If these two conditions are fulfilled, the firm is required to indemnify. Else, the party or the person who has incurred, if there is absence of proper prudence and negligence, it is the other way around. The partner shall indemnify the firm for any loss caused by his willful neglect in the conduct of the business. Just to put it, if the business is conducted the proper way, the partner is protected, he will be reimbursed or indemnified for all losses incurred. But if he conducts himself willfully negligently, then he has to indemnify. These are the various rights of a partner in terms of his share in profits, interest on additional funds brought in, indemnification for any expenses incurred by him, and there is no remuneration. And these rights can be varied by having specific term incorporated in the contract. We can go further also. There are issues in terms of what the firm is bound to do in respect of the partner so far as his acts with the third parties are concerned. Is the firm bound by the partner's act? We will just see one by one. Any act done by a partner within his implied authority binds the firm. Within his authority means if a partner in the course of business takes some action which in the normal course of business is within the limits of his implied authority, that action will be binding on the firm and the firm will be liable to the third party. But if it goes beyond that, if it is outside his implied authority, firm is not liable, it becomes personal liability of the partner. In order to bind a firm, only one requirement is there. The partner has to make it clear while transacting the business that he is doing or executing something in the name of the firm. Be it signing a contract, it should be for and on behalf of the firm. It should not be in the name of the partner. When it is in the name of the partner, it is not an act belonging to the firm, it is a personal. Therefore, mode of doing act to bind the firm is to do all actions in the name of the firm. To the outside world, the partner is the agent of the firm and Just like an agent represents and establishes contact with the outside world, any representations made by a partner on behalf of the firm and concerning its affairs is binding on the firm. And any details he has given, it is an evidence working against the firm if it is made in the ordinary course of business. To put it the other way, the firm cannot deny the representations or statements made by the partner in the course of business, as it is the principal and the partner is the agent, and agent's actions are as good as actions of the principal if they are done in the normal course of business. And if the partner has received some notice, if he has received some papers, if he has received some intimations addressed to the firm, notice to a partner is notice to a firm, except where the partner is involved in a fraud and he does it without the involvement of the firm. In the normal course, he is an agent. Any notice to the agent, any delivery to the agent is delivery to the principal. Therefore, notice to a partner is notice to a firm. But except in the case of fraud committed by the partner, wherein he personally will be liable, it will not be binding on the firm. Every partner is liable jointly and also severally for all acts of the firm done while he is a partner. In the sense, the entire business of partnership goes with the definition, the relationship between persons who have agreed to share the profits or losses of the business carried on by all or any of them acting for all. All acts of the firm is as per the relation built on the agreement, and partner is liable jointly or severally. In the sense, if there is a claim on the firm, the party or the creditor, he can file a case against all partners together, or he can pick and choose the individual partner and claim the whole amount from him, and it is for the partner to claim it from the rest of the partners. Liability of the firm for wrongful acts of partners. Now, if the partner does some wrongful acts, it is responsibility of the firm under this circumstance, where by the wrongful act or omission of a partner, loss or injury is caused by a third party, the firm is liable provided the partner was acting in the ordinary course of business. When you say ordinary course of business, it means acting in good faith, acting with due care, acting with due diligence, and absence of negligence. If these four are there, it is an act in the ordinary course of business. Anything that is done in the ordinary course of business is binding on the firm. Liability of the firm for wrongful acts, even when the act is wrongful, if it is done in the normal course of business, it is the act to be liable for by the firm. And that is the protection available to the partner who acts in good faith in the course of business. Sometimes it so happens partners transfer their interest to a third party. We have seen the rights of partners in the normal course. What happens if a partner transfers his rights to an outside party under a charge or mortgage, or what rights does the transferee have? Is he as good as a partner in his rights? It says a transfer by a partner, either absolute or by mortgage, the partner has transferred, by a charge on such interest. The transferee, whoever has got the transfer in his favor, when the firm continues its business, he cannot interfere in the conduct of business. He cannot ask accounts of the business because it is all belonging to the partner, not to the transferee. But he can receive, as and when the share of profits are distributed, he can receive the profits. And he shall accept the accounts given along with the profits. What this says is, a transferee, when he has received the ownership of the share of partner, doesn't become a partner by himself. He has got only one right, the right of receiving profits. He cannot interfere in the operations, nor can he require accounts. He can only receive profits which are shared along with other partners, and whatever statement of account is given along with sharing of profits, he can receive that. And he is not a partner. Second, if this is in respect of the firm is continued, if the firm is dissolved after he transfers, the transferring partner ceases to be a partner. Therefore, what the transferee will receive, here he received share of profits. Once the business is dissolved, what remains is share of assets. Total assets will be calculated, liabilities will be discharged, and there will be a balance, a surplus at the end, and the share of the transferor will be given to the transferee. He can have a share of the assets of the firm. And to understand the share of the assets, he can ask for a statement of account from the date of dissolution. Means he cannot do anything when the company is operating. When it is closed, from the date of dissolution till the settlement, he can ask for a statement of account. These are partners, not partners, right? When a partner transfers to a transferee, the transferee will have two types of rights. One when the firm continues and when the firm is dissolved. Let's get into the duties of partners in our next. Let's look into the general duties of partners. Partners are bound to carry on the business of the firm to the greatest common advantage for the joint benefit of every partner, and they should be just and faithful to each other, need to render true accounts, disclose full information on all things affecting the firm. Means it is full transparency, full disclosure, and working as a team for greatest common advantage in the course of carrying on the business. Second duty, every partner has to indemnify the firm if any loss is caused by fraud in the conduct of the business, because it is not the liability of the firm, it is the liability of the partner as such. He needs to indemnify the firm. The rights and duties of partners are a part of the relationship. They are fixed by the contract between partners. Any rights and duties mutually between partners, they can be varied as if they are varying the contract by consent of all. And even the agreement between partners mutually may even state things in restraint of trade, just like it may provide that a partner shall not carry any business other than that of the firm, because he is supposed to actively participate in the business. Then he cannot have a parallel business. Though it is in restraint of trade as per the Contract Act, it works for the partnership. because it is under a mutual contract which is validly enforceable. And in the normal course, a partner has every right to take part in the conduct of the business. As a part of the definition of partnership itself, it is there, but he is bound to attend diligently to his duties. He cannot be negligent. It has to be with utmost good faith as well as care and diligence. And all decisions invariably in the business are to be made by majority of partners. But the majority simple is not enough when it comes to changing the nature of business. If you are doing one type of business and if the partnership wants to change over to the another line of business, then it is required that all partners consent to the change. And every partner has got a right to access and inspect the books of accounts of the company. These four are common rights: to participate, to attend diligently, and to go by majority decision. But when it relates to nature of business, go for unanimous decision of all partners and review the books of accounts of the company as a matter of right. We have some more rights which indicate the obligations of the partners. If you can see it, property and rights which are brought into the stock of the firm. You bring capital and the capital is converted into assets of the company. They are all acquired not by partner, but they are belonging to the firm. This also includes goodwill of the firm. Just to say, property of the firm is not that of partners. It is of all partners put together as a property of the firm. Once it is introduced into the business, it belongs to all of them. Second, these properties are to be exclusively used for purposes of business. There should be no conflict of interest, no personal usage, as it is brought out here once again. If a partner derives any profits for himself, means if he makes some undue personal gains in connection with the business of the firm, he shall detail the account and pay it to the firm. It doesn't belong to him, any profit arising in the course of business. And if a partner carries on competing business with the firm, he is not supposed to do it. If he does it, he is going against the spirit of partnership. Any money that he earns from that business which is competing with partnership, all that profit he has to pay it to the partnership firm, because rightfully it belongs to this. There cannot be any personal profits. And if there is a reconstitution, for example, there is a share of 2:2:1 between three partners A, B, C. If there is one partner retires, then the remaining two partners continue. What this says is, where a change occurs in constitution of a firm, the rights and duties of partners in the reconstituted firm remain the same. In the earlier partnership, it was 2:2:1, means A and B had equal share and C had half of their individual shares, 1. Whereas once you reconstitute, A and B will have the same rights as before, means they are equal to each other in terms of their rights and duties. Where a firm reconstituted for a fixed term continues to carry after the expiry, we have seen that if it goes beyond its fixed term, it becomes a partnership at will, which we have seen separately. Where a firm constituted to carry out one or more adventures carries out other adventures or undertakings, the mutual rights and duties are the same. For example, if they are into business B Say they manufacture biscuits. The partners have mutual rights in sharing profits of the business of biscuits. Then they go for bread or for chocolate. Even when they do it, rights and duties of the partners will remain the same, just as we saw in the case of the profit sharing ratio. Similar thing happens with the other rights. They move with the business but remain consistent. Here there are certain duties which are duties arising out of holding out or estoppel, where a person knowingly permits himself to be represented as a partner, whether he is a partner or not. And after a partner's death, the business is continued in his old firm name. What happens to the firm? These are two situations we have to study here now. Anyone who permits himself to be represented as a partner to an outside world, he is liable, who on the faith of such representation gives credit to the firm. If someone says, I am the partner in this business, and then the third party gives credit or loan to the firm, it is based on the representation of this partner. And for that purpose, the partner who presents himself as a partner to the outside world will be bound by membership by holding out. He cannot deny later that I didn't mean it, whether the person representing himself does or does not know that the representation has reached the person so giving credit. He cannot deny tomorrow that the outside party had given the credit to the firm without depending on what representations he made. That is beyond his reach. What is required is there a representation made by a partner? If he has made a representation by a partner, the other party has got a right to say that I have made credit to the firm based on your representation. Therefore, I need to be protected in terms of my interest. Second, where after a partner's death, business is continued. If it is continued in the same old name and the deceased partner's name is also a part of it, but just because his name is continued, just because the old name is continued, the deceased partner's estate or personal property will not be liable for actions of the firm done after his death. Means a partner's liability for a firm's action is only till the person ceases to be a partner or he dies. Once he dies, his liability ceases, and whatever firm does thereafter, it cannot have any hold on the estate or property of the deceased partner. This is regarding section 28 in its two aspects of representation made by a partner and credit given by an outsider. Second, partner is deceased and the firm continues in the old name and old partner's name. This doesn't affect the liability of the deceased partner, which stops on the day of his death. There is one more aspect to be seen, which is specifically put under section 18, section 19 and section 27. Let us look into that. It talks of implied authority of agent and misapplication which binds the firm. Subject to provisions of this act, a partner is agent of the firm for the purposes of business of the firm. There is an agency. Firm is the principal, partner is the agent. and every partner is an agent of the other partner. And what does it say further? Subject to the provisions of section 22, which we will deal with, which is done to carry on the business the usual way, the authority of a partner to bind the firm is called implied authority. Every partner has got, as an agent of the firm, right to bind the firm. He can do all actions as a partner and keep the firm responsible for his actions. But there are certain specific exclusions from his right. His implied authority includes every other act as an agent. It doesn't include giving companies cases for arbitration. He cannot alone open a banking account unless it is agreed by other partners. He cannot compromise or relinquish a claim which is due to the firm and waive it. He cannot withdraw a court suit. He cannot admit a liability in a suit proceeding against the firm unless other partners agree to it or empower him. For the firm, he cannot acquire an immovable property, nor can he transfer an immovable property, and he cannot enter into another partnership on behalf of the firm. Means these are restrictions or exclusions from the implied authority of a partner. Means he is an agent, he can do whatever is required in the course of business, but his empowerment doesn't include these functions, which mainly pertains to banking, relinquishing a court claim, filing a suit, entering into a partnership, dealing with immovable property, admitting any liability, or going for arbitration. Then, when he receives money or property from a third party and he misapplies it, money or property so misapplied by any of the partners, the firm is liable to make good to the external party, but this partner is liable to the firm. In the sense, there are two responsibilities: by the firm to the external party and by the partner to the firm. Means as an agent, if he collects money from outside and misapplies it, it is a deal between partner and the firm. Outside party can claim that amount from the firm because firm is the principal. Liability of the firm for misapplication by partners. And firm will have its remedy against the partner for misuse of his rights as a partner. That brings us to the formation of a company. Here we will be looking into application for registration of a firm and the role of a registrar and what is involved in the registration, and how do we go about filing alterations with the registrar of firms. Let us first take up section 57. The registrar of firms is appointed by the state government and he has got definite areas of operation wherein he will be exercising his powers and duties in respect of the firms. Section 58 provides for application for registration. Now, the registration of a firm can be effected at any time by filing the application with the registrar in the prescribed form and with the prescribed fee, of course. What does it state? It states the name, it states the place and principal place of business with address, the names of any other places where the firm carries on business through its branches or outlets or networks. In respect of each partner, when did he join? the names in full and permanent address of partners. If it is a partnership for a fixed duration, what is the duration of the firm? And just like in a memorandum of association, there will be an association clause signed by all members. Here also, all subscribers or all partners will be signing the statement either directly or through their specially authorized agents in this behalf. And there will be, at the end of application, one more verification statement to be signed by the members on the truthfulness and knowledge of the same by the partners. And the firm name which we are using here, it will be once again subject to the broadly lines similar to Names and Emblems Act, which is talking of association with the government or governmental support or patronage. And the name, if it is okayed by the registrar of firms, it has to be ensured. And if the application, after meeting the requirement of the name, if it is signed with verification, then it is filed with the registrar. And what the registrar does, if the registrar is satisfied that the provisions of section 58, application and its name and signature and verification, is complied with, he shall record an entry and include the firm in the register of firms. It is just like taking it on record as a firm which is incorporated. After that, with the registrar of firms, the partnership firm can file various alterations and details under different sections. Section 60 talks of filing alterations in the firm name or place of business, where the firm opens and closes branches, closes the old branches and opens new branches. It is provided under 61. Any changes in the names and addresses of partners could be filed under section 62. If there is any change or dissolution of a firm or recording of withdrawal of a minor, it is filed under section 63. All these filings, if there are any errors or mistakes, they could be rectified by making a filing under section 64. Basically, under formation, we are talking of compiling an application after finalizing the partners, their contribution, their rights, and place of business, nature of partnership, and a verification signed, fee paid, and application filed with the registrar after confirming the name to be acceptable. And once it is done, we have got different sections to make additional filings on additional businesses, dissolution, opening and closing of branches, change in the names and addresses of partners, dissolution of a firm, or rectification of mistakes. Section 69 highlights why a registration is essentially for the benefit of the partnership firm. It says, if a partnership firm is not registered, a partner cannot file a suit against the firm or another partner to exercise any of his rights. It says, to file a case, the person suing must be shown as a partner in the register of firms, which is not possible when it is not registered. The legal remedy is lost. He cannot file a suit to enforce right arising from a contract because he is not partner of a registered firm. Okay, this is between partner versus partner, partner versus firm. What about firm? Even a firm cannot file a case against a third party for a right arising from a contract unless the firm is registered, and the person who goes to file the case, he must be a partner. When he files, his name must be registered or entered in the register of firms as a partner. Means if registration is not done, a partner cannot protect his rights, and a firm also cannot protect its contractual rights while it acts through the partners. Even when there is a claim for set off to enforce a right arising from a contract, the company suffers disablement. Legal remedies are affected. But there are exceptions to this. Partners have a right to sue for dissolution and for accounts of a dissolved firm, or any right or power to realize the property of a realized dissolved firm. Means when they file for dissolution, when they file for accounts of a dissolution firm, or when they file for realizing the proceeds from a dissolved firm, the right survives whether the firm is registered or not registered. It is independent of registration because it is a right of a partner in his individual capacity. Registration doesn't hurt him. Second case where the registration or no registration doesn't make a difference is when the official assignee wants to realize the property of the insolvent partner, or the receiver or the court orders to realize property of an insolvent partner. If something belongs to an insolvent partner and the realization has to be made by the official assignee, receiver or court, registration or no registration do not make any difference. This is the total content of section 69, effect of non-registration. Section 30 particularly talks about the privileges of a minor when he is entered into the benefits of a partnership, and what is the procedure, what are his rights, and is his property affected, and can he file a suit for statement of account or settlement of account, and he has got to make an election when he becomes a major within 6 months of that date. We will see one by one. A minor may not be a partner in a firm, means he cannot be taken as a regular partner, but he may be admitted to the benefits of partnership. Means he can have privileges of sharing the profits, but he cannot be a regular partner. But even when he is taken, it should be consented by all the partners. With the approval of all the partners, he can be admitted to the benefits of partnership. He can have a share in the profits of the company. Then, such minor has a right to share of the property and profits as may be agreed upon, and he can inspect and take a copy of the accounts of the firm. These are his privileges. BA, admitted to the benefits, get a share in the profits, inspect the books of account, take a copy of it. And such minor share is liable for the acts of the firm, but there is absolutely no personal liability for any act. His liability is restricted to his share in the partnership firm. His private estate or personal things are not liable. He doesn't have any personal liability. It is a privilege rather than a position of responsibility. Such minor, he cannot sue partners for payment of his share except when he wants to disconnect from the firm, sever his connection from the firm, based on a valuation to be done in accordance with the rule under section 48. Means he can sue for settlement only when he wants to close his books with the partnership firm and under no other circumstance. He has to continue with the firm otherwise. And there is a requirement that after 6 months or within 6 months after he becomes major or attaining majority, he has to make an election whether he wants to continue with the company firm as a regular partner or he doesn't want to continue. And that is his obligation to do it. Here what it says is a minor cannot say that he had no knowledge of such admission as a partner of a partnership firm, because it is implied. He is not exempt from claiming that I was not aware that I was a partner in this firm, and therefore since I was not aware, I didn't make the declaration which was required to be done within 6 months. To escape from that obligation, he cannot use ignorance or lack of knowledge as a part of his strategy. This is section 30. Mainly can be admitted, he can inspect copies, he can share profits, he can be admitted to the benefits, his personal estate is not liable, and he can file for settlement of account only when he is severing, and he is supposed to make a selection within 6 months. He cannot say I was not aware that I was admitted to the membership of a partnership firm. That privilege is not there with him. Section 30 elaborates on what other things a minor partner is supposed to do once he comes of age. On attaining majority, what he needs to do, and what are all the other procedural aspects involved. All these are listed out in section 30. We can just have a look at it. Within 6 months of his attaining majority or obtaining knowledge about, having been admitted to benefits of a partnership, whichever is later. For example, he becomes a major, let us say on 1st January. By 30th June, he should make a notice because it is 6 months. But on 1st January, he became major, but he was not aware that he was admitted to a partnership as a member or partner. He came to know on 1st of February only that he was a partner of a partnership firm and is entitled to the benefits. In that case, 6 months from the date he obtained knowledge that he was admitted to the benefits, 1st of February he will get 6 months, means 31st of July. 30th of June, based on 6 months from majority. 31st of July, based on 6 months from the date he came to know that he was admitted to the benefits. Later of the two means 31st of July. He has to give a public notice that he has elected to become a member or he has elected not to become a member, partner. Such notice shall determine his position regarding the firm, continuing as a partner, not continuing as a partner. If he fails to give such notice, it is presumed he has become a partner on the expiry of the said 6 months, either 30th June or 31st July. Notice giving is a must if he doesn't want to continue. If he doesn't give a notice, he automatically is presumed to have continued as a partner. What happens if he continues as a partner? Where such person becomes a partner, his rights and liabilities as a minor continue up to the date he becomes a partner, 31st July. But he also becomes personally liable till this time he was not personally liable, but once he adopts and becomes a member, becomes a partner, it dates back to his original admission to benefits. He becomes personally liable for all acts of the firm from the day he was admitted to the benefits of partnership. He was a minor at that point in time, but because of this provision, his liability starts from that day, and that is just like relating back. And his share in the property and profits of the firm shall be the share which he was entitled as a minor. When he was entered into the benefits of the partnership, he must have got 10% of the shares. That percentage of share will continue when he makes an election. This is the implication when he becomes a partner. What happens when he elects not to become a partner? Where such a person elects not to become a partner, his rights and liabilities shall continue to be those of a minor up to the date of public notice. He has to give a notice on one of these 2 days. Till the date of notice, he can continue as a minor. He shall not be liable for any acts after the date of notice. Anything that the partnership does after that notice, he is not liable. And he shall be entitled to sue the partners for share of property and profits. As we have seen, he can file a suit only when he leaves the partnership firm, and that right he can use here. He shall be entitled to sue the partners for his share of the property and profits in accordance with subsection 4, which we saw in the previous slide. This is the requirement or implication in terms of section 30 on attaining majority public notice, choosing to become a partner, choosing not to become a partner. What are the implications? Now let's study various aspects of reconstitution of a partnership firm. As we know, collectively we call partners as a firm. And if there is a firm of ABC, there will be a reconstitution in the firm if there is a new person getting added, a person leaves it for reasons of insolvency, death, or retirement, or he may be expelled. These things are seen from section 31 to 35. To add a new partner, which is permissible, but consent of all existing partners has to be obtained. And the new partner will be responsible for only future decisions of partnership. He will not be liable for action before he became a partner. This logic applies to all partners. Retirement we will see separately. When a member is expelled, say C is removed, but any decision to expel a person has to be based on the agreement, and it has to be done in good faith. And the rules which are applicable to a retiring partner equally apply to an expelled partner. But only thing, expulsion has to be based on contract and it should be done in good faith. When a person becomes insolvent, he ceases to be a partner from the date of being adjudged insolvent. Where the firm continues, the insolvent person cannot be responsible for any action after he becomes insolvent. And the same logic applies in respect of death of a partner, where under a contract the firm is not dissolved. In the sense, once the firm is reconstituted, it can be dissolved or it can be continued. If it continues, the estate of the deceased partner is not liable for any act of the firm after his death. Means a deceased partner not liable for actions of the firm after his death, an expelled partner, an insolvent partner, a retiring partner, not responsible for decisions of the partnership firm after his leaving or after his exit. In case of retiring partner, we can just see a partner may retire with the consent of all other partners in accordance with the agreement where the partnership is at will by giving a notice in writing to all other partners of his intention to retire. These are the three conditions to be fulfilled when a person retires. Then, a retiring partner may be discharged from any liability to any third party for acts of the firm done before his retirement, provided there is an agreement made by him with such third party and partners of the reconstituted firm. In the sense, so long as a person continues in a firm, he is liable for all acts and decisions of the firm till the date of his retirement. For future, he has no issue, but if he wants exemption for discharge from any liability to third party before his retirement, then it has to be by means of an agreement. Because if he doesn't take responsibility to a third party, it comes on the remaining partners. Therefore, an agreement is required between the third party and the continuing partners. If that agreement provides, there can be no liability for a retiring partner on even past transactions. And in case of retirement, it is always essential that he gives a public notice before he retires so that he can avoid future liabilities. He continues to be liable to third parties for any act done until public notice is given of retirement, because they can always say, we lent money to the firm because we thought you were continuing with the firm. There was no communication or notice from you on leaving the firm. That is estoppel, holding out. That risk is there. Therefore, he has to give a public notice. Notice may be given. It can be given by the retired partner or by any partner on his behalf. However, a retired partner is not liable to any third party who deals with the firm without knowing he was a partner. For example, he was a dormant partner. He retires. But someone cannot claim tomorrow that we didn't receive your notice of retirement, but we have funded the partnership firm to the extent of this. This claim will not work because the stranger or outsider was not aware that he was a partner because he was a dormant partner. He was nowhere visible in the operations of the company. But public notice of retirement is a protector of interest of a retiring partner so that he can avoid responsibility under estoppel as well as holding out and free from liability to outsiders. This is regarding section 32. When there is a reconstitution of a firm, there is a partner who goes out. He may be a retiring partner, he may be an expelled partner, or he is a deceased partner, or retiring, expelled, and deceased or insolvent. What are their rights when they go out of partnership? Can they carry on competing business? Can they carry on similar business? What happens if they have already given a continuing guarantee which will run continuously? Do they have any share in the future profits of the firm? These are 4 instances covered by section 36, 37 and 38. Let us take out 36. Can they carry on competing business? The answer is they can carry on competing business with that of the firm, but subject to three conditions. They should not use the firm name. They should not say they represent the business firm which they just now left. And they should not solicit business from customers of the existing partnership firm. If these three conditions are fulfilled, a retiring partner or an outgoing partner can carry on competing business, absolutely permitted. Can he carry on similar business? He cannot carry on similar business within a specified period. It is not indefinite, maybe for 2 years or within a specified local limits within that district. He can open it in some other district. He can open it after, say, specified period, after 6 months, after 2 years. Means he can carry on similar business, but not within the same area or specified local limits, and not within a specified period. And whenever a person is prevented from carrying on his business or trade, there is one section called Section 27 in Indian Contract Act, which talks of restraint of trade. Partnership Act says specifically, this provision of stopping a person to carry on business within a specified period or specified local limits does not attract Section 27 and therefore is valid. It is an exception to Section 27. What happens if they have given a continuing guarantee? A continuing guarantee given to a firm or to a third party in respect of transactions of the firm is revoked. That ends. As to future transaction, past it's bound. For future, it is revoked from the date of any change in the constitution of the firm. The day they resign, there is a reconstitution of the partnership firm. Once the reconstitution takes place, all future transactions will be taken out of the scope of this continuing guarantee and the liability will be frozen. Okay, now this outgoing partner, he has resigned or deceased or insolvent or retired, but he has not taken a settlement. The money is still lying with the company, firm, which has not made settlement of account. Is he entitled to share profits in future? This is an interesting case. It says, where any member has died or ceased to be a member, the surviving or continuing partners carry on the business without making any final settlement. Means his money continues to be used in the business of partnership. When it is used in the business of partnership, the profits of the partnership belong to all monies, including the monies of the retiring partner. What the section says, in the absence of a contract to the contrary, the outgoing partner or his estate is entitled to such share of profits attributable to the use of his share of property. Means proportionate share he needs to get out of the profits. If that is not possible to calculate, there is an option. On the amount due to him, an interest at the rate of 6% per annum is payable on his share of property. And this entitlement of interest or share of profits will continue till the date of settlement is made or the existing partners purchase the interest of the outgoing partner. Therefore, 36, 37 and 38 very clearly state on competing business, similar business not to be carried on within a territory or within a period, continuing guarantee lapses for future transactions. If the money settlement is not made to the outgoing partner, he will continue to have a share in the profits proportionately, or he should get 6% interest, and his entitlement ceases the day his settlement is done or his share is purchased. Now we will go forward to study about the last aspect of the Act, which relates to dissolution of the firm. This is a case where we look into under what circumstances the partnership goes for dissolution and closure of business. It could be done by an agreement, or there are situations where it becomes compulsory to dissolve. There are situations including illegality of objects. There may be chances where it is a partnership at will. At the will of any of the partner, it can be dissolved. There might be a court order also for dissolution of partnership. And dissolution also happens on certain contingencies like death of a partner and instances similar to that. Thus, under dissolution, we are talking of mainly 5 situations: dissolution by agreement, dissolution compulsorily due to illegality of objects, dissolution due to partnership at will, dissolution by order of the court for certain situations, and dissolution happening on certain contingencies including death of a partner. Let us take the first one. With the consent of all or in accordance with the agreement, a partnership can be dissolved in the normal course. Simple and straightforward. A partnership will be compulsorily dissolved if all partners except one become insolvent, because the partnership requires minimum 2 people. If everybody is insolvent, they are incapable of entering into a contract and it is compulsory to close the business. Or happening of any event which makes it unlawful for the business to be carried on. If the nature of business which is carried on is declared illegal by the company, by the court or by the government, it becomes unlawful to continue. Then the business has to be closed, it has to be dissolved. But what the rider says is, if the firm has got 2 objects, one of them is legal and the other is illegal, company can close the illegal business, but it can continue the legal business so long as they are separate and independent. Just to go through, however, the illegality of one or more shall not itself cause the dissolution of the firm in respect of lawful adventures and undertakings. If lawful adventure could be separated from unlawful, business could be continued. But if they are not separable, it becomes unlawful, dissolution becomes compulsory. Dissolution by agreement, compulsory dissolution. Dissolution by notice under partnership at will. As we have seen, any partner can serve a notice in writing of his intention to dissolve the firm when it is a partnership at will, any point in time. The firm is dissolved from the date notice is given, or notice may indicate a date from which the business has to be closed. Either of the dates has to be taken. Either dissolved date as indicated in the notice or the date of notice has to be taken as the date of dissolution. This is dissolution in respect of partnership at will. There are situations where dissolution happens on the happening of certain contingencies. What are those contingencies? These contingencies are driven by the contract. If it is a partnership for a specific duration, expiry of the duration, it closes. If it is a particular partnership for a venture or undertaking, on the completion of that. If a partner dies, the firm gets dissolved, it gets reconstituted. Or if a partner is adjudged insolvent, the business could be dissolved, the firm could be dissolved. Then we have got dissolution by the court. These are the 5 situations which dissolve the partnership firm: agreement, compulsory dissolution, lawfulness and insolvency of everyone except 1. Dissolution by notice in partnership at will, dissolution on completion of the object, completion of duration or death of a partner or adjudication as an insolvent, and also dissolution by the court. There are situations specific which are covered by dissolution by the court, which we will see in the next slide. Court normally takes up these cases at the suit of a partner. A court may dissolve a firm on any of the following grounds, namely, a partner has become unsound mind. Another partner says he has become mad, we don't want to continue this business. That a partner has become permanently incapable of performing his duties. We have to remember one thing, the incapable person is not approaching the court, the other partner is approaching the court because it is not possible to continue the business, therefore we want to close. That a partner guilty of conduct which might prejudicially affect the business, more pertaining to the practicability of business when one of the partners has got a tainted history. That a partner willfully, persistently commits breach and it is not reasonably practicable for the other partners to carry on business. They want to come out of this company. One of the partners reaches the court. And the partner transferred the whole of his interest to a third party, and that share is used for recovery of dues from him as an arrear of land revenue. Whenever recovery comes as an arrear of land revenue, it pertains to a partner in default to government. Whenever there is such a default and the partner's share is transferred in full to settle the arrears of land revenue, the partner might approach the court to close the business as well. And if the business is doing continuously losses, one can approach the court and then say it cannot be carried on except at a loss. Therefore, it is better we dissolve the business by a court order. Or any other ground which is just and equitable. The example that they were giving was just and equitable. If there are two partners and if they are not on talking terms, business will suffer. It will not proceed further. There is no meaning in taking it forward. Court might permit on just and equitable grounds to dissolve the business. Thus, dissolution by the court always at the instance of a suit by the partner on unsoundness of the partner, permanent incapability of the other partner, prejudicial conduct of business, a partner continuously willfully makes breach, and a partner's share is transferred to third party for recovery of collection of arrears of land revenue. Business is totally into loss and it cannot be continued, and on any just and equitable grounds. These are all listed in section 44 as grounds for dissolution of a partnership firm to be ordered by court. Once a business is dissolved for whatever reason, there are certain issues to be understood. How far the liability of the partners continues. What happens is that once a business is dissolved, a public notice will be given. Once public notice is given, business comes to a standstill. Thereafterwards, the assets are to be used and the winding up process starts. In the winding up, you settle all dues of outside parties and balance will go to partners. Now, in this whole process, what is the liability of the partners? Is it up to public notice? If after public notice, if you have to do the winding up, who is authorized to do it? Do the partners have the authority to do it? and on what basis they proceed on this. These details are given in section 45, section 46 and section 47. Let us see each one of them. The partners continue to be liable until public notice is given of the dissolution. They give a public notice. Till such time, whatever happens, they are liable. But only living people are liable till the public notice. People who have already died, who have already been adjudged insolvent, and people who have already retired, they have got earlier dates for closure of their liabilities. This is partners who continue, and they continue to be liable. Liability for acts of partners done after a dissolution. Till notice, the surviving partners are liable, whereas the rest of the people, the partner who dies, the partner who is insolvent, the partner who retires, is not liable for acts done after the date on which he ceases to be a partner. When he died, he ceased. When he declared insolvent, he ceased. And when he retired, he ceased. This notice is applicable to the other continuing members. Okay. Now, once notice is given, the winding up has to be done. How is it provided? Every partner is entitled to have the property of the firm applied in payment of debts and liabilities, and surplus, if any, has to be distributed among the partners. This is provided. Means after public notice, every partner has got a right to settle the outside dues and then have the balance distributed as belonging to partners. Who is having that authority? Section 47 says, after dissolution, the firm, the authority of the partner to bind the firm and mutual rights and obligations continue. They can bind, they can act, but they can act not for conducting the business, for winding up the affairs of the business. They can be in charge. They have the authority as may be necessary to wind up the affairs. For example, when you wind up, you have to sell the assets. You have to take care of the assets. You have to incur expenses. Who is having the authority? Continuing partners will have the authority to complete the transactions begun but unfinished at the time of dissolution, but not otherwise. Means this process of notice starts the process of winding up, which involves liquidation of assets, which could be done by the partners within their authority, and they can settle the external dues and be ready to share the balance, if any, among the partners as their own share. Section 48 talks of how to settle the debts of the firm and how to settle the debts of the individual partners. It lays down a guideline. And section 49 talks of different stages in which the payments are to be prioritized. Let us have a look at section 48. Where there are joint debts due from the firm and also separate debts due from the partner, joint debts of the firm and separate debts from the partner, the property of the firm shall be applied in the first instance for payment of debts of the firm. This is the priority. Property of the firm will be used to settle the joint debts due from the firm. If there is any surplus, the share of each partner shall be applied in payment of his separate debts. For example, if there is total of 1000 assets realized, debts paid 800, balance 200 is there. That 200 could be shared by partner A and B as 100 and 100. And if A has got a loan of say 50, this 100 could be used to pay his separate debt. His share could be settled with his debt. The separate property of any partner shall be applied in payment of his separate debts. There is no mixing up. Firm's property, firm's debts. If there is surplus, it goes to person of partners. If there is a personal property, it will be dealt separately for payment of personal debts of the partners. And surplus, if any, from the personal property could be used for payments of the debts of the firm, once again in the ratio of the partners. Means priority is joint debts, firm property used in joint debt, surplus used in the ratio of partnership profit sharing between the partners in settling their personal loans, and their personal property will go to settle only their personal debts. And what is the process of firm debts? What do you first clear? Subject to agreement by the partners, losses shall be paid first out of profits. If profits are not enough to pay the loss, profits means carried forward profits. If losses are more than profits, then capital will be used to fill the gap. If capital is not enough to cover the losses, then partners individually will bring in money in the ratio of their profits. Ultimately, the entire losses are to be covered. Losses covered by profits available. If profits are not sufficient, they will bring out capital and they will use the capital. If capital is not enough, they will raise additional contribution from the partners in the profit sharing ratio and the loss will be covered. There are assets of the firm. Assets will be used first to clear the debts of the firm to third parties. Then if there are loans or advances taken from each partner, proportionately it will be paid off. Once outside debts are cleared, once partners' debts are cleared, then each partner will be treated in terms of his capital contribution proportionately. After paying off his capital, still if there is a surplus, it will be shared among the partners, once again in the profit sharing ratio. As simple, all losses will be covered if required by collecting additional contribution in the ratio of share profits. All assets will be dissolved, liquidated to settle outside liabilities, advances brought in from the partners, repayment of capital. Still if there is surplus, it can be shared by the partners in the profit sharing ratio. Section 50, 51 and 52 talk of three specific situations. As per the fundamental rule of partnership, a partner is not supposed to make any personal gains. If he makes personal profit, he should give it back to the firm because it belongs to the firm, not to the person. Now, section 50 talks of what if a personal profit is done after dissolution? Does it belong to the partner or it belongs to the firm? That is section 50. A partner is admitted into partnership and he is told he has to pay a goodwill of say 10 lakh rupees or 12 lakh rupees. And the partnership is of a fixed duration of say 12 months. He pays 12 months and then joins the firm. After joining the firm, within 6 months, the partnership is dissolved. What happens to the goodwill he paid? Return of premium on premature dissolution. For a partnership with a life of 12 months, he paid a goodwill of 12 lakhs and the partnership closed within 6 months. Is he eligible for a refund? Section 51 talks about it. Section 52 talks about if in a partnership firm, the partnership agreement is subject to fraud and some partners have unlawfully made gains at the cost of others, what should happen to the claim of people who were defrauded? These three cases we can just see in these sections. Section 50 says Section 16 applies whenever there is personal profit made. As per Section 16, any personal profit doesn't belong to individuals, it belongs to the firm. Therefore, even after the firm is dissolved, the profit has to be returned to the firm. It has to be shared by the partners of the firm fully. Second, return of the premium on premature dissolution. Where a partner has paid a premium for a fixed term and the firm is dissolved before the expiration otherwise than by the death of the partner, he shall be entitled to repayment as may be reasonable, which he became a partner, unless if the closure of the partnership is due to reasons or default by this new partner, then he is not eligible for refund. It says, unless the dissolution is mainly due to his misconduct or the dissolution agreement did not contain any provision in the return of premium, means it was not provided by the agreement specifically, or the dissolution was caused by the misconduct of the new partner. In these two cases, there cannot be refund, but otherwise he is eligible in the name of justice and fair play. Then, where there is a fraud, it says any of the parties thereto losing money are entitled to resign the contract. They have got a lien and right of retention on the surplus of the assets. They can rank as a creditor in respect of any payment, and they have to be indemnified by the partner or partners guilty of fraud. If there is a fraud, they become creditors. They can claim funds against the assets of the company. They are entitled for the surplus and they are to be indemnified by the partners who are accused of fraud. Section 53, 54 and 55 talk of use of firm name after dissolution but before winding up, agreements in restraint of trade between partners on winding up, and agreement once again in restraint of trade in terms of the agreement to sell goodwill of the firm. These three aspects make great meaning to understand the closing formalities of a business. It says, after a firm is dissolved, every partner or his representative may restrain any other partner from carrying on a similar business in the same firm name or using any of the property from his benefit, and this restriction is until the affairs of the firm have been completely wound up. Till such time, every partner can be restrained from doing usage of the firm name or firm property. Then, partners upon dissolution can make an agreement that all of them will not carry on business similar to that of the erstwhile firm within a specified period and within specified local limits, provided the restrictions are reasonable. This is permitted in spite of Section 27 of Indian Contract Act. The third aspect talks of settlement of accounts after dissolution. The goodwill is included in the assets and it is sold. Where the goodwill is sold after dissolution, a partner may carry on a business competing with the buyer subject to the agreement of sale. Any partner can make an agreement with the buyer that such partner will not carry on the business within a specified period or specified limits to honor the agreement of sale, and this is respected by section 727 of the Contract Act. That ends our study of Indian Partnership Act in its 6 aspects. We have covered in the process the nature, rights, duties, information, formation of a new company with the registrar of firms, reconstitution and dissolution under their various respective heads. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.